Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you're currently sitting. Welcome to PPRO Live. Thank you for joining us in our segment, Navigating Payments in APAC. My name is An. I'm Head of Payment Networks for APAC, and I'm going to be the host for today's session. With me, I have two payment experts from PPRO, Kelvin and Tristan, and let's squeeze them for the answers around APAC that we need. Please welcome them. Why don't we do a quick round of introductions? Tristan, would you like to start?
Sure, of course. Thanks, On. So my name's Tristan Chiappini. I head the commercial operations here in APAC. And I'm lucky enough to sit in our Singapore office, which is where our local product development, engineering, dev resources sit, who are responsible for integrating and managing all of our direct connections here in APAC. Kelvin?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Kelvin Phua. I'm the global head for payment networks. I also sit in the APAC office in Singapore, and it's a pleasure to join you guys today.
Great, thanks. So before we get started, just a hint, right? These are the ground rules. This is a panel, open discussion. So don't be shy and post your questions into the chat. We'll answer them, hopefully along the session, or we have 10 minutes in the back to address questions as well. So please post them into the chat. So let's get into the meat of this. When we think about payments in APAC, usually our thoughts go to leading tech giants, cutting edge payments technologies like your e-wallets, Smile to Pay, but payment cultures across APAC vary drastically, which brings me to my first question for Tristan. Why are the markets so different in APAC?
Sure, and I love this question. It really leads into kind of the complexity of the topic at hand. So look, I think the most visible example I always give is when you arrive into Singapore, into the airport, obviously in pre-COVID times, less so now, and you step into the air conditioning of a taxi. You're sitting there and you look to your left and you see a sticker on the window that says the cab driver accepts 6 different card scheme brands. And then you look over to your right and you see a similar sticker, but this time there are 6 different e-wallet brands. And that's crazy. I grew up in London, and you go into a black cab in London, and they're always asking for cash. And even if there is a Visa or MasterCard sticker in the window, they usually tell you that the card machine is broken. And after spending time in Europe, I can honestly say that this region is one of the most challenging, one of the most fragmented, and one of the most complex. And really, I usually put this down to 6 different reasons. There are historical, there are political reasons. Look at China; it's grew up in isolation. Only very recently allowing international payments companies to compete in the domestic acquiring world. There are socioeconomic reasons. Look at the many markets across APAC with very thin bank penetration rates. Many of them are on the World Bank list as some of the least bank penetration rates in the world. Technology is another one of those reasons. Again, there is in some markets here, the payments infrastructure is very thin on the ground. So a lot of countries have actually made a jump or a leapfrog to the traditional POS or card acceptance and gone straight to e-wallets and digital forms of payments, QR codes, etc. There are some other reasons, cultural reasons. Japan is often cited here. There's a lack of consolidation, I think, in the market as well. If you look at markets like Europe or the US, there's a lot less consolidation here in APAC. In fact, if you look at many of the local markets, there are competing payment methods that are very much dominated locally by local players, and very few of those local players actually offer acceptance in other markets. And then the final one is around government policies and I think regulations that have come out, especially in response to COVID-19 this year.
Wow. Yeah. So especially when you touched on this year, right? There seems to be a lot of moving pieces in payments. So COVID is on everybody's mind this year. So how has the pandemic changed the payments dynamics in the region? Kelvin, can you speak to that?
Well, that's amazing. That's actually a very relevant question. I think we are in an unprecedented time. Like I always tell my friends, I don't think ever in my mind in human history has everyone worked from home at the same time, ever. So, that completely changed the dynamics of day-to-day life, not just payments, as a landscape. But, I think adding on to what Tristan mentioned, a lot of the governments has traditionally been planning for inclusion into e-commerce. They have been planning for their economies to start going into e-payments. And what COVID has done is absolutely accelerated that. Like just imagine a 3-year plan coming into effect in 9 months or 6 months. It depends on how fast they go. I mean, we have got challenges with technology infrastructure, as Tristan mentioned earlier on, and absolutely that's been the case. But what COVID has done is really compressed that. It's all that I have 3 years to implement this. No, it's going to be happening in 6 months. And just here in Singapore, as we've heard just recently in the news, we have got food stalls here, 18,000 of them in Singapore. In Singapore, we call them hawker centers, but basically they're food stalls consolidated together. Traditionally, it's always been a very cash-based business. But guess what? Half of them now accept digital payments. If you look at Indonesia, 30% more people now accept digital payments. And the good news is a lot of them are planning to continue to use digital payments after the pandemic is over. So that's great news for everybody. Bigger consumer pool, lots of very interesting things happening now in that regard. Yeah.
And I love that, Kelvin, you mentioning cash. If I had $1 for every time I saw an article or white paper, with a new headline about how the global pandemic has reduced the use of cash, I'd be a very rich man, right? Of course, this has happened. It's, it comes straight from the Ministry of the Bleeding Obvious. But, the adoption of digital payments was previously thought to take several years. And to your point, we've seen a massive escalation in that. The timelines have gone from, as you said, 3 years to, we need it now. Great example with the hawker centers. I use the QR codes in the hawker centers all the time now.
Yeah, exactly. And today people are afraid of handling cash. I think in the past it was cash is comfortable, cash is money in the hand. But today with the pandemic, nobody wants to touch anybody. You don't want to shake hands. You don't want to touch cash for sure. And so, a lot of the governments have created national payment systems in the past, right? And that development work has absolutely accelerated in 2020. And today, recently in the news, the Singapore National Payment System is going to hook up with the Thailand National Payment System. Pay now if you know it, and PromptPay if you know that. And soon you can do, cross-border payments and transfers very quickly. That's amazing. I mean, before pandemic times, that would have taken a couple of years to discuss, I'm sure. I mean, I'm no government relations person, but I would imagine that would be the case.
So I love. So there's obviously we've seen at PPRO a huge increase in demand and volume for cross-border payments. But bringing up the government, I think we've seen some great strides. I think at the beginning of the year there were a lot of budgetary announcements around further increasing their push towards the digitalization of their own economies. And really, I think, in four different ways. They've focused on the population themselves and actually physically changing the payment preferences or habits of their populations by incentivizing to use digital forms of payment. The example there is the Malaysian government paying consumers the equivalent of around 10 USD to use a few of their, I think 3 of their different dormitory wallets there, even actually allowing relief payments into those wallets.
Yes,
I think this is
absolutely.
a super exciting topic. I just have to cut you guys here, so that we can, address some of the other interesting topics in APAC as well. So, instant going online for merchants and consumers alike, disappearing cash. I love that. Finally, so what are some of the new payment technologies that you can highlight to us that we see emerging? Tristan.
Sure. So not necessarily a technology, I think, but certainly we've seen a big trend towards the buy now, pay later products, right? Because look, unfortunately, another impact that we've seen globally is due to the pandemic hitting people's incomes, right? In some cases, in a very hard way. But unfortunately, many of these same consumers are actually at the same time moving online. So, what we're seeing here in APAC is certainly an increased demand for buy now, pay later type schemes. The European equivalent would be a Klarna or an Affirm that's, out of Canada, but now firmly into the US. Local alternatives here are, here in Singapore, like a Hula. We've seen Afterpay, based out of Australia, making ground globally. Their now acceptance in the US, and recently purchasing or acquiring a company in Spain to push into Europe. And I think, those kinds of payment schemes are really taking advantage of this trend. They're seeing large investments, and some of them are actually using these investments to push to other markets. Hula's a great example of that, moving to Malaysia or Hong Kong. Afterpay, as I said, moving to the US, moving to Europe. So I think we're going to see a lot of these different ones continue to be more and more popular.
Very interesting. Wow, there's so many different things here, right? And I feel there's a lot of complexity. I'm just putting myself into the shoes of a payment service provider or merchant, right? And you have to deal with all of this complexity. What can you say to the question, is it worth all the effort, right? Maybe Kelvin, let's start with you.
Oh yeah.
What's your view on this?
The short answer to that is an absolute yes. I think Asia Pacific is, it's always been known to be the next growth region, and I think there's a couple of things that's been happening now that is actually going to help drive that even further. Just talking a little bit about the earlier question about technology, I think buy now, pay later for sure. But also what you tend to see is that with governments rapidly trying to push adoptions among their citizens, they're finding new and better ways to make things easier for their consumers. You get more and more participations. For example, the use of a mobile phone instead of a very complex series of numbers to identify each other for the transfer. In Singapore, in Thailand, you see that in Malaysia coming up soon. We do it now. All these are incredible trends that help a lot of adoption, meaning more and more consumers come online. But more importantly, on a grander scale, we see recently the signing of the RCEP agreement, which is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Package, which means that you have essentially 1/3 of the world's population that covers 1/3 of the world's GDP coming together in 15 countries, trying to work it out and have that new regional focus. And so you get exciting countries, not just in ASEAN, but also people like China, Australia, New Zealand, all participating, all of them with a lot of trade possibilities. And so any merchant and businesses intending to look into APAC, I think now is the time, absolutely.
Tristan, to add on to that, look, we know that it's a complex market, right? We've been talking about that. There are various tax regimes to navigate. There's markets a little bit like Latin America with capital controls, meaning you have to get there are FX conversions in there. There are, there's new regulation coming up all the time. Look at Indonesia. looking for local representation offices for large merchants now, and looking to further regulate e-commerce, tax e-commerce. But there is demand, right? There's demand from the local populations, as Kelvin said. Look, in APAC, it's going to be worth, it's going to be 2/3 of the world's e-commerce very soon, right? So there are massive markets here. There's a lot of opportunity, and for those who can navigate that opportunity, there's a lot of reward. There's a lot of return that you can make.
I see. Yeah, and and the markets, especially Southeast Asia, is really a place to watch, right? Just reading the new projections for Indonesia, right? Definitely a market that will even surpass India in terms of e-commerce. So it's really exciting. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we don't have all the time in the world, but our audience, with a wrap up and piece of advice. If you can give one piece of advice, one thing a business can do today, right, to get started on the expansion to APAC, what would that be? Let's start with you, Tristan.
Sure. So look, thinking about this from a merchant point of view, right? What we're obviously seeing is, as we said, there's been an increase in cross-border, so an increase in global e-commerce. But what we've also seen is like a hyper-localization of the actual payment preferences themselves, right? So merchants really need to analyze their card abandon rates and their conversion rates. We're working hard on this with a number of our strategic partners and some of their merchants. But if you look at cart abandon rates, generally they're between 60 and 80%. And 1 in 5 of those are actually caused by the lack of the local payment preferences at the checkout. So merchants and subsequently their PSPs really need to understand the local payment preferences of those markets and really offer those local payments to the consumers to enable them to check out, to improve those abandon rates of the card. And really it's down to partnership, right? No man is an island. We can't do this by ourselves. So really I'd encourage those merchants to talk to their payment service providers and get advice from their payment service providers on how to best navigate some of these complexities in the APAC market.
Thank you, Tristan. Yeah, very, very important. Just before we go on to Kelvin, right? We have our question segment just after the wrap up. So please, post your questions, and just a small reminder. Kelvin.
Yeah, well, I would totally echo what Tristan has just mentioned. I think conversion rate is the key, particularly today. We talked a bit about this earlier. Income is going to be a struggle. People are going to look for great value. People are going to look for all the bargains. So every customer you get onto your site, you absolutely need to think about conversion. And I would extend that thought to say conversion is not just in terms of payment methods selection. That is absolutely critical. But it also starts with things like language. Just remember, APAC is not one country, not one common language. You've got Japanese, you've got Thai, you've got Vietnamese. You've got to be ready with all these languages, the differences. How are you going to cater for them? Thinking about currencies, local currencies as well. I mean, having the local payment methods supports all these local currencies. That kind of choice is super critical when it comes to business. And of course, finally, to complete the journey, you got to make sure that your logistics partner as well is up to scratch. So it cannot really be end to end. And unfortunately, we don't have a time to kind of get into too much with all the specific countries. But I will call out here, put in a plug for our Southeast Asian white paper, which actually goes into a lot of critical details within the region of Southeast Asia, which is really, really exploding. As you mentioned earlier, India Indonesia is touted to overtake India in a short span of time. So I think that white paper will give a lot of helpful information as well.
And Indonesia is a fascinating market in itself, right? With multiple e-wallets, with bank transfers available, with cash over the counter options available, even with their own buy now, pay later scheme, which is one of those fintechs that we're very closely watching in the market as well. So a lot of exciting things happening in Indonesia.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a growing market. The other one I would say is Vietnam, which is lots of exciting entrepreneurs, lots of new participants into it. Really really want to get in there, I think those are exciting opportunities for anyone wanting to get into Asia Pacific.
Thank you, Tristan. Thank you, Kelvin. We have lots of advice here. I don't have a better advice for you than, we know the first the secret to getting ahead is to get started. So please drop these gentlemen an email. You can reach them via sales@ppro.com. And yeah, this brings us to the end of this panel. And let's dive right into the questions. Let me take a first question that was sent in before the session. Do I have to translate my website and show local currencies to use LPMs? Yeah.
Maybe I'll take a stab at
Kelvin,
it.
Kelvin,
earlier. Yeah. I think that you absolutely need to. It all depends on country. So, for example, countries like Japan, which is one of, I think, the third largest economy in the world. Huge consumer of luxury goods. You absolutely need to have it in Japanese because that's what they are comfortable with. Of course, Japanese payment methods will be much preferred. And then you have to make sure that even your sales support and your customer service has to be in Japanese as well. And then you have countries I mentioned earlier, like Thailand. It's also a very different in terms of languages. You need to make sure that you have that. Vietnamese, these are a couple of countries that come to mind. Even China, right? Most of the Chinese do understand English, but having a Chinese website makes a lot of difference. Tristan, what about you?
Look, I would certainly echo that, and a lot of that's common sense, right? I mean, would I today shop on a Japanese website? Probably not, right? Because I don't understand Japanese. But we used to talk a lot about a shop for one mentality. So as we've seen more merchants go online, and we've seen this at PPRO, more than doubling our active merchants in the last year. But a lot of other companies are reporting very similar trends. You're seeing a lot more competition in the online space, right? With merchants adopting online payments, with merchants going online sometimes for the first time. So we're all competing globally, right? Because we've spoken about an increase in cross-border trade. So really, you're looking to create a shop for one, a tailored experience towards that consumer. And of course, that includes language. Of course, that includes showing it in their currency, because more than likely they're able to find it somewhere else in a website that's more tailored towards them, right? Because there's this increased competition. But if you want to go even further down the kind of tailoring of the rabbit hole, towards tailoring your offering, your website, you can look at some of the local websites from different markets to see how they position their products, to see how they present their website. And you can really tailor it on a market or at least regional point of view.
Okay, thanks. There's the live questions. I'm just checking out the live questions. It seems people are still being a bit shy here. Please use this opportunity to squeeze these experts for everything that you need. So I'm going to take another question that has been sent in before. With all this growth in Asia, will we see a consolidation of payment methods, or do you predict more will emerge? Tristan, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. So I think I previously said that there is a lot of consolidation yet to happen in APAC, and as the investment comes in to different markets, I mean, look at it again, Indonesia. It seems to be a battleground for at least the wallets with the different Chinese players. You can see that the Google's investing heavily into the market, multiple countries investing heavily into the market. So there will be a consolidation over time. What governments are looking to do as well to aid this consolidation and really tackle it from a consumer point of view, to make it easier for a consumer to complete the transaction or have a digital form of payment, is something like the standardization of QR codes. And we've seen this in many markets, right, where you have multiple e-wallets, which predominantly are local e-wallets in that market. all having to conform to a standardized QR code. In that way, if a consumer is using wallet A, B, or C, the merchant, it's made easier for the merchant because they just have to display a standardized QR code, and it's made easier for a consumer that get to pick their e-wallet because it's all interoperable. You see this on a limited scale as well, from market to market, with a lot of the cross agreements that are happening. Look at Japan and Paytm or Alipay. So you can see that here in Singapore as well, with a lot of the standardized QR codes. There are different other Chinese wallets, for example, which run on the same rails. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, so I hear, there's not going to be one payment method to rule them all. But we're also not going to keep continuing to see 30 wallets in Malaysia being operational for a long time, I see. So some consolidation.
Yeah, there will be those kinds of models. A lot of them are underwater, right? They're trying to buy consumer loyalty, and you can only do that for so long until you're either invested in or you have to close your shop. So that is a lot of the way it's creating that customer loyalty through buying it, offer them coupons, discounts, etc., which isn't a sustainable business model. Kelvin, what?
Well, I think that's part of the charm of Asia Pacific. I think, because a lot of the markets are growing and very experimental, you're going to see a lot of people thinking about new ideas to disrupt the market. And they pursue different strategies. And you mentioned one of them, which is, basically it's a run for consumer acquisition. And perhaps maybe the dream is that with enough big enough consumer as a base, there'll be some big investor that comes along and then they can kind of pivot that strategy. So there will for sure be some consolidation. But even with that, I'm sure there will be new upstarts that will think, of newer ideas, which is what really makes this region super interesting and super exciting, because that drive for better innovation and disrupting of the market is going to continue. So consolidation, and then there'll be new ones coming in, and then they kind of consolidate again. So it's going to be a continuous cycle, I think, for the next couple of years.
And I love that because it almost adds to the complexity, right? So it makes the market even more complexity. And what we're saying is we're not going to see a decrease in that complexity for some time to come.
No, not at all. And I think to add to that, you have government regulations coming in, for all the right reasons, right? They want to ensure that with all these new technologies, new disruptions, that their citizens are taken care of. And so that adds this interesting layer of complexity to this entire region, because they're trying to protect them at the same time to encourage new technology to continue. So this whole balancing act is something that we need to watch closely for anyone coming in. Yeah.
Super insightful. Yeah, thanks. I just have to, I think this is great, but we have some further questions from the audience that I want to make sure we address as well. So there's a question from Ajay Narang. Thank you for your question. Reads, hello from London. Great discussion. What's the panel's view or central bank digital currencies, and when will we see it being mass adopted cross-border in APAC in the light of the developments on the digital yuan? Kelvin?
Sorry, I didn't get the question. Could you say it again? Oh, let me see.
What's your view? Yeah, what's your view on digital currencies like the digital yuan being mass adopted, that are basically being issued by central bank?
Right. I would say that this is probably going to be an ongoing thing. The sentiment in most governments in Asia Pacific is quite conservative. So they will want to think about how stable it is, how practical it is, how can this cross-border, basically at the end of the day, a digital currency, you still need to establish some form of equivalence within the different countries, right? And so this is where it will happen. I'm quite sure of it, but as to when it will happen, it's still too early to call, because right now, only China has pretty much started it. Many countries are talking about, as a first step, you've got digital banking that's now starting up in Singapore. There's a lot of this development work going on there. But in terms of actual currencies, it's probably a little bit like Bitcoin in the longer term. You know, people need to figure out what does it mean, how does it work. So probably not in the near future, I don't think. Tristan.
Yeah, look, certainly agree with that. And it almost enacts this age-old debate about a distributed ledger versus centralized ledger, with obviously the digital yen being an example of the centralized. It may get adopted internally. And if it does, that's really through the government's push to do that, either through incentivization or moving some of their payment systems onto this so that consumers have to engage with it. But I certainly don't see it being a cross-border currency anytime soon.
Thanks. There's another question from Andrew Sales, more on our product offering. Will PPRO introduce local currency settlement in APAC? Yeah, or will the focus remain on cross-currency settlement into USD, for example? Yeah, I think this is, Tristan, you want to take this?
Well, very easy answer to that. Can be answered in one word. It's yes, right?
Okay.
We're working hard on that. We're leveraging our banking network. We're seeing some great economies of scale from our banking network here and a number of banking partners across not only global, but in APAC itself. So yes, we'll be looking to launch this.
Thank you. Okay, I think this was the last question that we could address in our time. So for the people who are either joining today or will watch this later, feel free to post your questions to us, and we'll pick them up and answer them and post the answer on the events page. So check it out there later. Also, a couple of hints. The Southeast Asia white paper that PPRO is publishing, that was mentioned by you, Kelvin, before, is available for download on the event page. So please, check that out. That's going to be your Bible for APAC expansion. Has all the necessary info on APAC and the different markets. And then lastly, reach out to sales@ppro.com. To get in touch with Tristan and Kelvin personally, and if you want to have any questions you want to discuss with them. Yeah, I think that's the end of our session. I thank everyone very much. To our speakers, Tristan and Kelvin. Thanks for being here and being grilled by me and the audience. And yeah, thanks to the audience for joining us either now live or in the future watching the recap. Thank you very much. Have a good day or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And yeah, see you in our next segment.
Thank you.
Stay safe, everyone.
See you guys. Bye-bye.